Arthur Blake stared at the ceiling, the faint morning light streaming through the worn-out blinds of their modest apartment. The once vibrant man now felt like a shadow of his former self. 4 months ago, he had been a proud chauffeur for one of the country's leading corporations. He had never imagined that his best friend, Victor Steele, would be the one to orchestrate his downfall. That fateful car accident had been blamed on Arthur, and without evidence to defend himself, he was fired and left blacklisted in the industry. Since then, life had become an uphill battle. Arthur's days now revolved around cleaning, cooking, and fixing things around the house while his wife, Camille, went to work. He hadn't complained once, even as the role reversal drained the last bit of dignity he had left. Every morning, he forced a smile onto his face as he prepared breakfast for his daughter, Maya, a bright and cheerful 6-year-old who adored her father. She was his only source of joy in an otherwise bleak existence. That morning, Arthur finished packing Maya's lunch and walked her to the door. Kneeling to her level, he brushed her dark curls away from her face and kissed her forehead. "Be good at school, princess," he said, his voice warm but tired. "I will, Daddy." Maya grinned, her toothy smile lighting up his heart. "Will you pick me up today?" Arthur hesitated, glancing back at the messy kitchen. "I'll try, sweetheart. If not, Mommy will." Maya's smile faltered for a moment, but quickly returned as she hugged him tightly. "I love you, Daddy." Arthur watched her skip off to the school bus, waving until it turned the corner. He closed the door with a sigh and turned to face the mountain of chores awaiting him. The sink was leaking again, Camille's car needed washing, and the house was overdue for a deep clean. He rolled up his sleeves and got to work. By noon, Arthur had cleaned the entire house, scrubbed the floors, fixed the sink, and even managed to wash both of Camille's cars. As he stood in the garage, drying his hands, he heard a familiar voice behind him. "Arthur, you really don't have to push yourself so hard," said Leela, Camille's younger cousin, who had dropped by for a quick visit. Leela was a kind-hearted college senior who often helped Arthur with chores when she visited on weekends. "I'm fine, Leela," Arthur replied with a faint smile. "You should enjoy your break instead of worrying about me." "But you've been doing everything on your own," Leela insisted, her brows furrowed with concern. "It's not fair." "It's my responsibility," Arthur interrupted gently. "This is my home, and I'll take care of it." Leela sighed, but nodded, knowing Arthur's pride wouldn't let her push further. "Well, if you need anything, just ask," she said before heading out. Arthur returned to the kitchen to prepare lunch. As he stirred the pot of soup, he heard the front door open. Camille walked in, dressed impeccably in her black and white corporate attire, her heels clicking sharply against the wooden floor. Arthur's face lit up with excitement. He wiped his hands on a towel and approached her with open arms. "Welcome home, Camille," he greeted warmly, leaning in for a hug. Camille brushed past him without a second glance, leaving his arms hanging awkwardly in the air. Arthur's smile faded, but he quickly recovered and followed her into the living room. "Let me help you relax," he offered, gently placing his hands on her shoulders for a massage. Camille stiffened under his touch. "Not today, Arthur," she said coldly, shrugging off his hands. She sank into the sofa, her tired eyes fixed on her phone. Arthur felt a pang of disappointment, but tried to hide it. Is something wrong? He asked softly, sitting beside her. No, Arthur, Camille replied curtly, not bothering to look up. I'm just tired. Arthur hesitated, unsure if he should press further. The distance between them had grown over the past few months, and he could feel it. Camille, he began cautiously, you've been avoiding me for weeks. Did I do something wrong? Camille sighed, visibly irritated. Arthur, I said I'm tired. I don't want to talk about this right now. But enough, she snapped, cutting him off. If you're so desperate for something to do, why don't you make me something to eat? I'm starving. The harshness in her tone made Arthur flinch, but he nodded obediently and rose to his feet. I'll get right on it, he said quietly, heading to the kitchen. As he prepared Camille's lunch, Arthur couldn't shake the sinking feeling in his chest. He had always been a man of patience, but lately he felt like a ghost in his own home. Camille's indifference cut deeper than any insult, and he couldn't help but wonder when their love had begun to fade. Midway through slicing vegetables, a thought struck him. He wiped his hands and returned to the living room. Camille, where's Maya? He asked, his voice tinged with concern. Camille glanced up briefly, her expression blank. What do you mean? Did you forget to pick her up from school? Arthur's voice rose slightly, panic setting in. Camille rolled her eyes. Oh, spare me the lecture, Arthur. You can't expect me to remember everything. She's your daughter too. Arthur's jaw tightened, anger simmering beneath the surface. Our daughter deserves better than this, Camille. How can you prioritize work over her? Camille shot to her feet, her face twisted with fury. Don't you dare lecture me. If you're so concerned about her, maybe you should get a damn job and take care of her yourself. Stop being a useless burden and start contributing something for once. The words hit Arthur like a punch to the gut. He stood frozen, his mind reeling. Was this how Camille truly saw him? A failure, a leech? He opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. But no words came out. At that moment, Leela stepped into the room, her face pale with shock. Camille, that's enough, she said firmly. You have no right to talk to Arthur like that. He's doing his best, and you should respect him for it. Camille scoffed, grabbing her handbag from the sofa. I see you've teamed up with him now. Fine, enjoy your little pity party. I'm going upstairs. As Camille stormed past Arthur, nearly knocking him over, Leela placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. Don't listen to her, Arthur, she said gently. She doesn't mean it. Arthur forced a weak smile. Thanks, Leela. I'll be fine. But deep down, he wasn't fine. As he watched Camille disappear up the stairs, Arthur felt an ache in his chest that refused to go away. He thought back to their college days, when Camille had been his biggest supporter. She had loved him when he had nothing, or so he believed. Now her words and actions painted a very different picture. Later that evening, after picking Maya up from school, Arthur sat alone in the garage, staring at the bouquet of flowers he had bought earlier. He had planned to surprise Camille, hoping it might rekindle the spark they had lost. But now, he wasn't sure it would make a difference. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the walls, Arthur felt the weight of his world pressing down on him. He loved Camille, but the growing chasm between them felt insurmountable, and though he couldn't put his finger on it, something deep inside him told him that things were about to get worse, much worse. Arthur Blake woke up the next day with a sense of determination, clinging to the hope that things could still improve. He had promised himself he would do everything possible to salvage his marriage and his family. After dropping Maya off at school, he spent the morning running errands and cleaning the house again. His plan was simple: prepare a nice dinner, buy Camille her favorite flowers, and show her how much he still cared. By mid-afternoon, Arthur stood in a small florist shop, debating between a bouquet of red roses or a mix of lilies and tulips. The florist, a kind elderly woman, smiled at him. "Are these for someone special?" she asked. "Yes," Arthur replied, his voice soft. "My wife." The florist's eyes sparkled. "Then go with the lilies and tulips. They're elegant and thoughtful, just like a good husband." Arthur nodded, paid with the little cash he had left, and left the shop with a renewed sense of hope. The bouquet in hand, he drove home, rehearsing the words he wanted to say to Camille. He would apologize for being unable to provide more, even though he knew he didn't have to. He would promise her that he was still looking for work and that things would get better. As he pulled into the driveway, he noticed Camille's car parked haphazardly in front of the house. He frowned slightly. She rarely came home early from work, taking it as a good sign. He grabbed the flowers and headed inside. The house was eerily quiet, with no sign of Camille in the living room or kitchen. "Camille?" he called out, his voice echoing through the silence. No response? He began climbing the stairs toward their bedroom. Halfway up, he heard faint sounds, muffled voices and laughter. His steps slowed as the sounds became clearer. His heart sank as he recognized Camille's voice, but there was something off about her tone. It wasn't the usual coldness she reserved for him. It was warm, playful, and flirtatious. Then came the unmistakable sound of a man's laughter. Arthur froze. His grip on the bouquet tightened as he tried to rationalize what he was hearing. Perhaps she was on the phone with a colleague. Perhaps he was misunderstanding the situation. But as he approached the bedroom door, the noises grew louder and his worst fears began to crystallize. "Victor! You're insatiable!" Camille's voice purred from the other side of the door. Arthur's breath caught in his throat. Victor, his best friend, his former boss? He felt his world spinning, but he couldn't stop himself from reaching for the doorknob. Slowly, he pushed the door open, the bouquet trembling in his hand. What he saw on the other side shattered him. Camille was lying on their bed, her hair disheveled, her body wrapped around Victor Steele. The man who had once been Arthur's closest friend was now laughing with her, their intimacy an unspoken betrayal. The room fell silent as Camille and Victor finally noticed him standing there. For a brief moment, guilt flashed across Victor's face before it was replaced by a smug smirk. Camille, however, showed no such emotion. Instead, she sighed in annoyance and sat up, pulling the sheet around herself. "What are you doing here, Arthur?" she asked coldly, as though he were the intruder. "I thought you'd be out longer." Arthur couldn't speak. His voice had deserted him, replaced by a heavy, suffocating silence. His mind raced, trying to comprehend the betrayal before him. "You're just going to stand there and gawk," Victor said, his tone dripping with arrogance. He swung his legs over the side of the bed and began pulling on his pants, unbothered by Arthur's presence. Honestly, Arthur, I don't know why you're so surprised. Did you really think a woman like Camille would stay loyal to a failure like you? Arthur's grip on the bouquet loosened, and the flowers fell to the floor. How could you? He finally managed to choke out, his voice trembling. Victor, you were my friend. Victor laughed, a cruel sound that echoed in Arthur's ears. Friend, you're delusional. You were just a pawn in my game. Did you really think I'd let you keep working for me after that little accident? I had you fired, Arthur. It was easy, really. Arthur's legs felt weak, but he steadied himself against the doorframe. You, you set me up, he whispered, the realization cutting deeper than he thought possible. Of course I did. Victor admitted without hesitation. I needed you out of the way so I could have Camille. And honestly, she deserves better than some broke, jobless nobody. Arthur's gaze shifted to Camille, who was now sitting on the edge of the bed, her arms crossed. Tell me he's lying, Arthur pleaded, his voice breaking. Tell me this isn't what I think it is. Camille's eyes met his, and for a fleeting moment he thought he saw a flicker of regret, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared. Why should I lie? She said flatly. Victor's right. You've been a dead weight ever since you lost your job. I've been carrying this family, and I deserve better. Arthur's chest heaved with anger and heartbreak. We built this life together, he said, his voice rising. I loved you, Camille. I gave you everything I had. And it wasn't enough, she snapped, her voice cold and cutting. I married you out of pity, Arthur. I thought maybe you'd rise to the occasion, but you never did. Look at you, standing there like some pathetic fool with a bouquet of flowers, hoping to win me back. It's sad, really. Victor chuckled, stepping closer to Arthur. Face it, Arthur. You've lost. Camille is mine now. And guess what? She's carrying my child. Arthur's world crumbled at those words. He staggered backward, his knees threatening to give out. He looked at Camille, hoping she would deny it, but her silence was all the confirmation he needed. I can't believe this, Arthur said, his voice barely a whisper. After everything we've been through. Camille shrugged, her indifference like a dagger to his heart. Don't make this harder than it needs to be, Arthur. Just leave. You're not wanted here. Arthur's fists clenched at his sides, his knuckles white. Every fiber of his being wanted to lash out, to make them feel the pain they had inflicted on him. But instead, he turned and walked away. As he descended the stairs, he felt the weight of their betrayal crushing him. Before he could reach the front door, Victor called out after him. Hey, Arthur, he said mockingly. Don't take it too hard. Not everyone's cut out to be a winner. Arthur didn't look back. He stepped outside, the cool evening air hitting his face like a slap. His mind raced as he stumbled toward his car, unsure of what to do or where to go. But where to go, Kay, or flowers lay forgotten on the floor of the bedroom, a symbol of his shattered dreams. As Arthur sat in the driver's seat, staring blankly at the steering wheel, one thing became painfully clear. The life he thought he knew was over. But deep within the ruins of his heart, a small ember of resolve began to burn. They had taken everything from him, his job, his dignity, his family, but they hadn't taken his will to fight. He wiped the tears from his face and started the engine. Whatever came next, he would face it head on. The betrayal had broken him, but it had also awakened something within him, something stronger, sharper, and more determined than ever before. Arthur Blake drove aimlessly through the city, his mind a whirlwind of anger, pain, and betrayal. The echoes of Camille's cold words and Victor's smug laughter rang in his ears, drowning out any coherent thought. He had lost everything: his marriage, his family, and his dignity. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, knuckles white as he struggled to contain the storm of emotions raging within him. He pulled into an empty parking lot near a closed diner, the neon closed sign blinking faintly in the darkness. Shutting off the engine, Arthur sat in silence, his head falling into his hands. He couldn't go back home, not to the house that now felt tainted, not with Camille and Victor there. He wanted to scream, to cry, to lash out, but all he could do was sit in the suffocating quiet. As he tried to gather his thoughts, the hum of an engine broke the stillness. A sleek black SUV pulled into the lot, its tinted windows concealing the occupants. Arthur sat up, a flicker of unease creeping into his chest. The vehicle parked a few feet away, and three people stepped out. A woman in her late 30s, dressed in an elegant black suit, flanked by two men in matching attire. They exuded an air of authority. Their movements calculated and deliberate. The woman approached Arthur's car and knocked gently on the window. Her expression was calm but purposeful, her piercing gray eyes meeting his with an intensity that made his stomach churn. "Arthur Blake?" she asked, her voice smooth and professional. Arthur hesitated, unsure of whether to respond. "Who's asking?" he finally muttered, lowering the window slightly. "My name is Sophia Romano," she replied, extending a hand. "Looking for me?" Arthur repeated, his brow furrowing. "Why, I don't know you." The florist's eyes sparkled. "Then go with the lilies and tulips. They're elegant and thoughtful, just like a good husband." Arthur nodded, paid with the little cash he had left, and left the shop with a renewed sense of hope. The bouquet in hand, he drove home, rehearsing the words he wanted to say to Camille. He would apologize for being unable to provide more, even though he knew he didn't have to. He would promise her that he was still looking for work and that things would get better. As he pulled into the driveway, he noticed Camille's car parked haphazardly in front of the house. He frowned slightly. She rarely came home early from work. Taking it as a good sign, he grabbed the flowers and headed inside. The house was eerily quiet, with no sign of Camille in the living room or kitchen. "Camille?" he called out, his voice echoing through the silence. No response? He began climbing the stairs toward their bedroom. Halfway up, he heard faint sounds, muffled voices and laughter. His steps slowed as the sounds became clearer. His heart sank as he recognized Camille's voice, but there was something off about her tone. It wasn't the usual coldness she reserved for him. It was warm, playful, and flirtatious. Then came the unmistakable sound of a man's laughter. Arthur froze. His grip on the bouquet tightened as he tried to rationalize what he was hearing. Perhaps she was on the phone with a colleague. Perhaps he was misunderstanding the situation. But as he approached the bedroom door, the noises grew louder and his worst fears began to crystallize. Victor, you're insatiable. Camille's voice purred from the other side of the door. Arthur's breath caught in his throat. Victor, his best friend, his former boss? He felt his world spinning, but he couldn't stop himself from reaching for the doorknob. Slowly, he pushed the door open, the bouquet trembling in his hand. What he saw on the other side shattered him. Camille was lying on their bed, her hair disheveled, her body wrapped around Victor Steele. The man who had once been Arthur's closest friend was now laughing with her, their intimacy an unspoken betrayal. The room fell silent as Camille and Victor finally noticed him standing there. For a brief moment, guilt flashed across Victor's face before it was replaced by a smug smirk. Camille, however, showed no such emotion. Instead, she sighed in annoyance and sat up, pulling the sheet around herself. "What are you doing here, Arthur?" she asked coldly, as though he were the intruder. "I thought you'd be out longer." Arthur couldn't speak. His voice had deserted him, replaced by a heavy, suffocating silence. His mind raced, trying to comprehend the betrayal before him. "You're just going to stand there and gawk," Victor said, his tone dripping with arrogance. He swung his legs over the side of the bed and began pulling on his pants, unbothered by Arthur's presence. "Honestly, Arthur, I don't know why you're so surprised. Did you really think a woman like Camille would stay loyal to a failure like you?" Arthur's grip on the bouquet loosened, and the flowers fell to the floor. "How could you?" he finally managed to choke out, his voice trembling. "Victor, you were my friend." Victor laughed, a cruel sound that echoed in Arthur's ears. "Friend? You're delusional. You were just a pawn in my game. Did you really think I'd let you keep working for me after that little accident? I had you fired, Arthur. It was easy, really." Arthur's legs felt weak, but he steadied himself against the doorframe. You set me up," he whispered, the realization cutting deeper than he thought possible. "Of course I did," Victor admitted without hesitation. "I needed you out of the way so I could have Camille. And honestly, she deserves better than some broke, jobless nobody." Arthur's gaze shifted to Camille, who was now sitting on the edge of the bed, her arms crossed. "Tell me he's lying," Arthur pleaded, his voice breaking. "Tell me this isn't what I think it is." Camille's eyes met his, and for a fleeting moment he thought he saw a flicker of regret, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared. "Why should I lie?" she said flatly. "Victor's right. You've been a dead weight ever since you lost your job. I've been carrying this family, and I deserve better." Arthur's chest heaved with anger and heartbreak. "We built this life together," he said, his voice rising. "I loved you, Camille. I gave you everything I had." "And it wasn't enough," she snapped, her voice cold and cutting. "I married you out of pity, Arthur. I thought maybe you'd rise to the occasion, but you never did. Look at you, standing there like some pathetic fool with a bouquet of flowers, hoping to win me back. It's sad, really." Victor chuckled, stepping closer to Arthur. "Face it, Arthur. You've lost. Camille is mine now. And guess what? She's carrying my child." Arthur's world crumbled at those words. He staggered backward, his knees threatening to give out. He looked at Camille, hoping she would deny it, but her silence was all the confirmation he needed. I can't believe this, Arthur said, his voice barely a whisper. After everything we've been through. Camille shrugged, her indifference like a dagger to his heart. Don't make this harder than it needs to be, Arthur. Just leave. You're not wanted here. Arthur's fists clenched at his sides, his knuckles white. Every fiber of his being wanted to lash out, to make them feel the pain they had inflicted on him. But instead, he turned and walked away. As he descended the stairs, he felt the weight of their betrayal crushing him. Before he could reach the front door, Victor called out after him. Hey, Arthur, he said mockingly. Don't take it too hard. Not everyone's cut out to be a winner. Arthur didn't look back. He stepped outside, the cool evening air hitting his face like a slap. His mind raced as he stumbled toward his car, unsure of what to do or where to go. Or where to go, okay, or flowers lay forgotten on the floor of the bedroom, a symbol of his shattered dreams. As Arthur sat in the driver's seat, staring blankly at the steering wheel, one thing became painfully clear. The life he thought he knew was over. But deep within the ruins of his heart, a small ember of resolve began to burn. They had taken everything from him, his job, his dignity, his family, but they hadn't taken his will to fight. He wiped the tears from his face and started the engine. Whatever came next, he would face it head on. The betrayal had broken him, but it had also awakened something within him, something stronger, sharper, and more determined than ever before. Arthur Blake drove aimlessly through the city, his mind a whirlwind of anger, pain, and betrayal. The echoes of Camille's cold words and Victor's smug laughter rang in his ears, drowning out any coherent thought. He had lost everything: his marriage, his family, and his dignity. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, knuckles white as he struggled to contain the storm of emotions raging within him. He pulled into an empty parking lot near a closed diner, the neon closed sign blinking faintly in the darkness. Shutting off the engine, Arthur sat in silence, his head falling into his hands. He couldn't go back home, not to the house that now felt tainted, not with Camille and Victor there. He wanted to scream, to cry, to lash out, but all he could do was sit in the suffocating quiet. As he tried to gather his thoughts, the hum of an engine broke the stillness. A sleek black SUV pulled into the lot, its tinted windows concealing the occupants. Arthur sat up, a flicker of unease creeping into his chest. The vehicle parked a few feet away, and three people stepped out. A woman in her late 30s, dressed in an elegant black suit, flanked by two men in matching attire. They exuded an air of authority. Their movements calculated and deliberate. The woman approached Arthur's car and knocked gently on the window. Her expression was calm but purposeful, her piercing gray eyes meeting his with an intensity that made his stomach churn. "Arthur Blake?" she asked, her voice smooth and professional. Arthur hesitated, unsure of whether to respond. "Who's asking?" he finally muttered, lowering the window slightly. "My name is Sophia Romano," she replied, extending a hand. "Looking for me?" Arthur repeated, his brow furrowing. "Why? I don't know you." Sophia smiled faintly, a glimmer of sympathy in her eyes. "You may not know me, but I know you. Or more accurately, I know who you truly are. She gestured toward the sous vide. May we talk somewhere private? There's a lot you need to hear, and I prefer not to do this in a parking lot. Arthur's instincts screamed at him to refuse, to drive away and leave these strangers behind. But something in Sophia's tone, calm, assured, yet tinged with urgency, made him pause. With a reluctant nod, he opened the door and stepped out, his arms crossed defensively. This better not be some kind of scam, he warned, his voice sharp. I've had enough for one day. Sophia nodded. I promise you, Mr. Blake, this is no scam. Please come with us. Reluctantly, Arthur followed her to the SUV. Once inside, Sophia handed him a manila folder. Before I explain, I need you to look at these. Arthur opened the folder, his eyes scanning the contents. Inside were photographs, grainy, faded images of a young boy standing beside a smiling couple in front of a sprawling mansion. The boy had the same dark eyes and crooked smile Arthur saw in the mirror every day. There were also legal documents, a DNA test, and a copy of a will. This doesn't make any sense, Arthur said, his voice shaky as he flipped through the papers. Who are these people? Sophia took a deep breath. The boy in the photos is you. The couple, Ross and Elena Romano, were your biological parents. Arthur froze, the words hanging in the air like a thunderclap. He looked at Sophia, his eyes narrowing. What are you talking about? My parents died when I was a kid. They were poor, just regular people. They weren't your real parents, Sophia said gently. You were kidnapped when you were 9 years old. Your real parents, Ross and Elena Romano, searched for you tirelessly, but they never found you. They died a few years ago, still believing you were alive. Arthur shook his head, the weight of her words pressing down on him. No, this can't be true. I know it's overwhelming, Sophia said, her tone softening. But it's the truth. The DNA test confirms it, and there's more. Your father, Ross Romano, was a business tycoon, one of the wealthiest men in the country. When he passed away, he left the majority of his fortune and his company to you. Arthur stared at her, his mind reeling. Why would he do that? He didn't even know me. Sophia smiled faintly. He never stopped believing you would come back. In his will, he made it clear that everything he built was for you. Arthur leaned back in his seat, his thoughts a chaotic jumble. The idea that he was the heir to a vast fortune, that his entire identity had been a lie, was too much to process. So, what happens now? That depends on you, Sophia said. Your father's company, Romano Enterprises, is in need of leadership. Your older brother, Nicholas, has been running it in your absence, but there are complications. Complications, Arthur asked, raising an eyebrow. Sophia hesitated. Nicholas has been mishandling the company's finances. If someone doesn't step in soon, everything your father built could be lost. Arthur let out a bitter laugh. So you want me to swoop in and save the day? I'm not exactly CO material. Sophia's expression hardened. You're more capable than you think, Mr. Romano. And whether you like it or not, this is your legacy. Your family's legacy. Are you really willing to walk away from it? Arthur fell silent, the weight of her words sinking in. He thought of Maya, of the life he wanted to give her, the life Camille and Victor had stolen from him. Maybe this was his chance to start over, to prove to himself and everyone else that he was more than a failure. After a long pause, he looked up at Sophia. Take me there. Sophia's lips curved into a satisfied smile. Very well. Welcome home, Mr. Romano. The drive to the Romano estate was surreal. Arthur stared out the window, the city lights fading into the distance as the SUV climbed a winding road toward the hills. When they arrived, the gates opened to reveal a sprawling mansion bathed in warm golden light. Arthur's breath caught in his throat as he took in the grandeur, the marble columns, the manicured gardens, the fountain that sparkled under the moonlight. This is it, Sophia said as the car came to a stop. Your new home. Arthur stepped out of the SUV, his legs unsteady. The sheer scale of the mansion was overwhelming, but it was the sense of familiarity that unsettled him most. As he walked up the steps, memories began to surface, fragmented images of running through the gardens, of his mother's laughter, of his father lifting him onto his shoulders. The front door opened, and a young woman stepped out. She had striking green eyes and long auburn hair, her features a mirror of his own. Her face lit up with a mixture of disbelief and joy. Jaden, she whispered. Arthur froze. What did you call me? Jaden, she said again, tears streaming down her face. It's me, Evelyn, your little sister. Arthur's heart ached as he stared at her. For the first time in years, he felt a glimmer of something he thought he'd lost. Hope. Evelyn ran to him, wrapping her arms around him in a tight embrace. Welcome home, she said softly. Arthur stood there, torn between disbelief and acceptance. For so long, he had been lost, abandoned, and betrayed. But now, standing in the place where he had begun his life, surrounded by people who seemed to care, he felt the stirrings of a new purpose. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he knew one thing for certain: his life would never be the same again. Arthur, no, Jaden Romano, stood in the grand foyer of the Romano mansion, the weight of his newfound identity pressing heavily on his chest. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above him, their brilliance reflecting off the marble floors and ornate gold trim that lined the walls. Everything about this place screamed wealth and power, yet Jaden felt like a stranger in a home that was supposed to be his. Evelyn, his younger sister, walked beside him, her excitement barely contained. I still can't believe it, she said, glancing at him with a smile that wavered with emotion. After all these years, you're finally back. Jaden nodded, though his mind was elsewhere. He couldn't shake the disbelief that this sprawling estate, this life of unimaginable luxury, was supposed to belong to him. How could he reconcile the man he had been? Broken, humiliated, and betrayed, with the person everyone now called Jaden Romano. As they reached the end of the hallway, Sophia Romano, the poised woman who'd found him, appeared from a side door. Jaden, she began, her tone as crisp and commanding as ever. We've prepared a room for you. Tomorrow, you'll begin familiarizing yourself with the company. The board is eager to meet you. The company? Jaden repeated, his voice betraying his unease. I don't know the first thing about running a business. Sophia's sharp gray eyes softened slightly. You'll learn. Your father left you this legacy for a reason. You've already overcome more than most people ever will. That's the kind of strength you'll need to lead. Evelyn placed a comforting hand on his arm. You're not alone, Jaden. I'll help you. We all will. Not all of us, a cold voice interrupted from the shadows. Jaden turned to see a tall man stepping into the light. He had a commanding presence, with sharp features and calculating blue eyes. His tailored suit fit perfectly, exuding wealth and confidence, but the faint smirk on his lips was anything but welcoming. "Hello, little brother," the man said, his tone dripping with mockery. "I'm Nicholas. Welcome back to the family." Jaden stiffened, sensing the hostility behind Nicholas's words. "Thanks," he replied curtly, unsure of how else to respond. Nicholas's smirk deepened as he crossed his arms. "You'll forgive me if I'm not as overjoyed as Evelyn here. It's not every day someone shows up out of nowhere and tries to claim everything I've been managing for years." Nicholas, Sophia interjected sharply, her tone like ice. "This is not the time for petty rivalries. Jaden is the rightful heir, as per Ross Romano's will." "Oh, I'm well aware of what the will says," Nicholas shot back, his eyes narrowing at Jaden. "But let's not pretend this is a fairy tale. He's been gone for over 15 years. What could he possibly know about running a billion-dollar corporation?" Jaden felt his fists clench, but before he could respond, Evelyn stepped between them. "That's enough, Nicholas," she said firmly. "Jaden is our brother, and he belongs here just as much as you do." Nicholas chuckled, raising his hands in mock surrender. Of course. I'm just stating the obvious." He turned to Jaden, his smile devoid of warmth. "Good luck, little brother. You'll need it." With that, Nicholas walked away, his footsteps echoing down the marble hallway. Jaden exhaled, the tension in the air finally easing. "Don't let him get to you," Evelyn said softly. "Nicholas has always been." Jaden nodded, but the encounter left a bitter taste in his mouth. It was clear that his return had disrupted the fragile balance of power within the family, and Nicholas wasn't going to make things easy for him. The next morning, Jaden found himself standing in front of the Romano Enterprises building. The sleek, modern skyscraper towered above the city, its mirrored windows reflecting the world below. As he stepped through the revolving doors, he was greeted by a wave of hushed whispers and curious stares from employees. "That's him," one woman whispered to her colleague. "Jaden Romano, the long-lost son." "He looks just like Ross," another murmured. Jaden kept his head high, determined not to let the scrutiny affect him. He followed Sophia and Evelyn to the elevator, which whisked them up to the top floor where the boardroom awaited. As they entered, the room fell silent. The board members, a mix of seasoned executives and younger professionals, all turned to stare at Jaden. Sophia stepped forward, her voice commanding their attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce Jaden Romano, the rightful heir and new CEO of Romano Enterprises." There was a beat of silence before polite applause filled the room. Jaden felt a surge of nerves, but forced himself to smile and nod. Nicholas, seated at the far end of the table, watched with a smug expression. "Well, Jaden," he said, his tone laced with condescension. "Welcome to the big leagues. I hope you're ready." The meeting began with discussions of quarterly earnings, upcoming projects, and internal challenges. Jaden struggled to keep up with the jargon and complex figures being thrown around, but he took notes diligently, determined to prove himself. At one point, Nicholas leaned back in his chair and smirked. "You're awfully quiet, little brother. Have anything to add? Or are you just here for the show?" The room tensed, all eyes turning to Jaden. He met Nicholas's gaze, refusing to back down. "I may not know everything yet," he said evenly, "but I'm here to learn. And when I do, I'll make sure this company thrives." Nicholas raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. "We'll see." After the meeting, Evelyn led Jaden to his new office. It was a spacious corner room with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking view of the city. A large mahogany desk sat at the center, flanked by leather chairs and shelves lined with books and awards. "This used to be Dad's office," Evelyn said, her voice tinged with emotion. "It's yours now." Jaden ran his fingers along the edge of the desk, a mix of pride and apprehension washing over him. "It's overwhelming," he admitted. "I don't know if I'm ready for this." "You are," Evelyn said firmly. "Dad believed in you, and so do I. We'll figure this out together." Just as Jaden was beginning to feel a sliver of confidence, the door opened and Nicholas walked in uninvited. "Settling in, are we?" he asked, his tone mocking. "What do you want, Nicholas?" Evelyn snapped, clearly exasperated. Nicholas ignored her, his focus on Jaden. "Just a friendly word of advice, little brother. This world isn't for the faint of heart. If you can't keep up, you'll be chewed up and spit out and spit out." Jaden met his gaze, his jaw tightening. "I didn't come here to fail, Nicholas." Nicholas's smirk widened. "We'll see about that." With that, he turned and walked out, leaving Jaden and Evelyn alone. Evelyn placed a reassuring hand on Jaden's shoulder. "Don't let him intimidate you. Nicholas thrives on making others feel small, but you're stronger than he thinks." Jaden nodded, though the encounter only fueled his determination. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in years, he felt a spark of hope. He wasn't just Arthur Blake, the man who had lost everything. He was Jaden Romano, and he was ready to fight for his legacy and his future. Jaden Romano stood in his office, the sprawling view of the city stretching out before him, though his mind was far from the present moment. He had spent weeks trying to get a handle on Romano Enterprises, diving headfirst into meetings, reports, and strategies. Yet no matter how much progress he made, the ghosts of his past lingered, their voices echoing in his thoughts. He had faced the corporate battlefield with Nicholas, navigated the skeptical board members, and begun earning respect in a world that once seemed so foreign. But today, he would confront the demons that had haunted him since his return. His phone buzzed, breaking his reverie. The screen lit up with an alert from his lawyer. The custody hearing for Maya had been scheduled. The sight of her name brought both warmth and resolve to his heart. Camille, his estranged wife, was determined to fight for sole custody, painting him as an absentee father unworthy of raising their daughter. But Jaden had no intention of letting her win. Mia was the one pure, beautiful thing in his life, and he would move mountains to protect her. A knock on the door pulled him back to reality. "Come in," he said, his voice steady but sharp. Sophia entered, her ever-composed demeanor slightly softer today. "You're ready, I take it." Jaden nodded. "It's time." Sophia gave him a small nod of approval. The car is waiting. As they stepped into the sleek black car waiting outside the Romano Tower, Jaden's jaw tightened. This wasn't just a meeting about Maya. It was an opportunity to face Camille and reclaim the power she had taken from him all those months ago. He would no longer be the broken man she had left behind. The drive to Camille's lawyer's office was tense but silent. Jaden's mind raced through the possible scenarios, preparing himself for whatever venom Camille might hurl at him. When they arrived, he stepped out of the car, his polished suit and confident stride masking the turmoil inside. Inside the office, Camille was already waiting. She sat across the conference table, her appearance as immaculate as ever. Perfectly styled hair, a designer dress, and a cold, calculating expression. Beside her sat Victor Steele, the man who had once been Jaden's closest friend and was now his most loathed enemy. Seeing them together ignited a fire in Jaden's chest, but he kept his composure. Jaden, Camille greeted, her tone dripping with feigned politeness. How unexpected of you to show up looking, well, like this. She gestured dismissively to his attire, as if mocking his transformation. Jaden ignored her, his gaze steady and unyielding. Camille. Victor, let's get to the point. Victor leaned back in his chair, a smug grin plastered on his face. Always so serious, aren't you, Arthur? Sorry, I mean Jaden. Quite the upgrade, I must say. Jaden's lips pressed into a thin line. Spare me the theatrics, Victor. This isn't about you. Camille leaned forward, her icy eyes narrowing. Oh, but it is, Jaden. You see, Maya deserves stability. A parent who can provide her with the life she deserves. And let's be honest, that's not you. Jaden's fists clenched under the table, but he kept his voice calm. Stability, like the kind of stability you and Victor provide, having an affair in our marital home while Mia was downstairs, that kind of stability? Camille's eyes flickered with irritation, but she quickly regained her composure. The past is irrelevant. This is about Maya's future. And I've been the one raising her while you were busy playing CO. Jaden leaned forward, his voice cutting like a blade. The past is entirely relevant, Camille. It shows exactly the kind of person you are. A person who prioritizes herself over her family. Mia deserves better than that. Victor chuckled, his smugness palpable. Big talk coming from someone who only recently figured out how to wear a suit. Jaden turned his gaze to Victor, his eyes cold and unflinching. You really like hearing yourself talk, don't you, Victor? But let's not forget who you really are. A man who destroyed his best friend's career for his own gain. I wonder what the board of directors at your company would think. I wonder what the board of directors at your company would think if they knew the truth. Victor's smirk faltered for a split second, but he quickly recovered. Empty threats, Jaden. No one would believe you. Oh, they'll believe me, Jaden said, a hint of satisfaction in his voice. Because I have proof, emails, phone records, and even a few interesting photos of your little rendezvous with Camille during work hours. Shall I share them with the press? Camille's expression darkened, and Victor's face turned red with anger. You wouldn't dare, Camille hissed. Try me, Jaden replied, his tone deadly serious. This isn't a game, Camille. You and Victor have spent months trying to tear me down, But I'm done playing the victim. I'm fighting for Maya, and I won't stop until she's safe from your toxic influence. The tension in the room was suffocating. Camille stared at Jaden, her jaw tight, while Victor sat silently, his bravado stripped away. Sophia, who had remained silent until now, cleared her throat. The evidence Jaden has collected is substantial, and it would be in your best interest to reconsider your position. A prolonged custody battle would only harm Maya, and it's clear that Jaden has the resources to fight this all the way to court. Camille's hands curled into fists on the table. You think you've won, don't you, Jaden? This isn't about winning, Jaden said firmly. It's about what's best for Maya, and I'm prepared to do whatever it takes to protect her. For a moment, Camille's icy facade cracked, revealing a flicker of doubt. She glanced at Victor, who avoided her gaze, his earlier confidence nowhere to be found. Finally, she sighed, leaning back in her chair. Fine. If you want to play the hero, go ahead. But don't think for a second that this is over. It doesn't have to be a fight, Camille, Jaden said, his tone softening. If you truly care about Maya, you'll work with me, not against me. Camille didn't respond. Instead, she grabbed her purse and stood, her heels clicking against the floor as she stormed out of the room. Victor hesitated, shooting Jaden one last venomous glare before following her. When the door closed, Jaden exhaled deeply, the weight of the confrontation finally lifting from his shoulders. Sophia placed a reassuring hand on his arm. You handled that well. It's not over, Jaden said quietly. Not yet. No, Sophia agreed, but you've taken the first step, and that's more than most people ever do. As they left the office, Jaden's thoughts drifted to Maya. He could almost hear her laughter, see her bright smile, and feel her tiny arms wrapped around him in a hug. She was his anchor, the reason he kept fighting, and no matter how messy things became, he would never stop fighting for her. The past had tried to break him, but Jaden wasn't the man he used to be. He was stronger now, and he was ready to face whatever came next. Jaden Romano stood in the middle of the Grand Romano Mansion's sunlit library, a place that felt more like a sanctuary than a room. Books lined the walls from floor to ceiling, their spines glinting in the morning light streaming through massive windows. He held a photo of his father, Ross Romano, a man he barely remembered, but whose legacy now rested squarely on his shoulders. The stakes were higher than ever, not just for him, but for Maya, for Evelyn, and for the Romano Corporation. He had begun to accept that he was no longer just Arthur Blake, the man who had been trampled by life. He was Jaden Romano, and he was rebuilding himself from the ashes of his past. The custody case had tilted in Jaden's favor after the explosive confrontation with Camille. His lawyers had presented evidence of her neglect and infidelity, and the court had granted him primary custody of Maya. The victory was bittersweet. Camille's venomous parting words echoed in his mind. You may have Maya for now, but don't think I'll let you keep her forever. He had no doubt she would try to retaliate, but for now, Maya was safe. And that was all that mattered. Jaden's focus shifted to the Romano Corporation, a juggernaut of business with a reputation that had been tarnished under Nicholas's mismanagement. In the weeks since his return, Jaden had thrown himself into the company with relentless determination. He spent late nights poring over financial reports, meeting with department heads, and studying the intricacies of the business world. Evelyn remained by his side, her unwavering support giving him the strength to push forward. Together, they were determined to restore the company to its former glory. One afternoon, Evelyn burst into Jaden's office with an excited grin. "You won't believe this," she said, waving a stack of papers. "I found the leak in the company's finances." Jaden looked up from his laptop, his interest piqued. "The missing funds?" Evelyn nodded, handing him the documents. "It's worse than we thought. Nicholas has been funneling money into a series of offshore accounts under shell corporations. He's stolen over $10 million. Jaden's jaw tightened as he scanned the documents. "That bastard! I knew he was up to something. But this is criminal." Evelyn's expression darkened. "We need to act fast before he can cover his tracks. If the board finds out about this, it could be the leverage we need to force him out." Jaden leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. Nicholas had been a thorn in his side since the day he returned. The man's arrogance, underhanded tactics, and blatant disdain for Jaden had pushed him to the brink. But this wasn't just about personal animosity. This was about protecting the company and its employees from Nicholas's greed. "Gather everything we have," Jaden said decisively. "We're going to bring this to the board." The next day, Jaden and Evelyn stood before the Romano Corporation's board of directors in the sleek, glass-walled conference room. The atmosphere was tense, the air thick with anticipation as Jaden presented the evidence against Nicholas. He outlined the financial discrepancies, the offshore accounts, and the damning paper trail that led directly to his brother. "This isn't just a breach of trust," Jaden concluded, his voice steady and authoritative. "It's theft. Nicholas has not only betrayed this company, but also our father's legacy. I'm asking the board to vote for his immediate removal and to support legal action against him." The room buzzed with murmurs as the board members exchanged glances. Some nodded in agreement, while others looked hesitant. Nicholas, seated at the far end of the table, was visibly furious. His face was flushed, and his hands gripped the armrests of his chair so tightly his knuckles turned white. "This is absurd!" Nicholas barked, standing abruptly. "These accusations are baseless. Jordan is trying to smear my name because he's threatened by my success." Evelyn shot to her feet, her eyes blazing. "Success? You mean stealing from the company and jeopardizing its future? You've done nothing but line your own pockets, Nicholas, and we have the evidence to prove it." Nicholas glared at her, but before he could respond, one of the senior board members, a gray-haired man named Mr. Harrington, raised a hand to silence the room. "Enough," he said, his voice calm but commanding. "The evidence is clear. Nicholas, you've betrayed the trust of this company and its stakeholders. I see no choice but to support Jaden's proposal for your removal." The vote was unanimous. Nicholas was stripped of his position and escorted out of the building by security. As he passed Jaden, he sneered, "This isn't over, little brother. You'll regret this." Jaden met his gaze without flinching. "I doubt that." With Nicholas gone, Jaden and Evelyn wasted no time in repairing the damage he had caused. They implemented new financial protocols, hired an external auditing team, and began rebuilding relationships with clients and investors. The company's stock began to stabilize, and employee morale improved as confidence in the leadership was restored. Meanwhile, Jaden's personal life also began to flourish. Maya had adjusted well to her new home, her laughter filling the once quiet halls of the Romano mansion. Evelyn adored her niece and often spent evenings baking cookies or reading bedtime stories with her. Watching Mia thrive gave Jaden a renewed sense of purpose, reminding him why he fought so hard to reclaim his life. One evening, as Jaden tucked Maya into bed, she looked up at him with wide, curious eyes. "Daddy, are we happy now?" The question caught him off guard, but he smiled and brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Yes, princess, we're happy, and we're going to stay that way." The days turned into weeks, and Jaden's transformation from a broken man to a confident leader became evident to everyone around him. Even Sophia, who had been skeptical of his abilities at first, admitted she was impressed. Admitted she was impressed. "You've proven yourself, Jaden," she said during a meeting in his office. "Your father would be proud." Jaden nodded, his chest swelling with pride. "Thank you, Sophia. But I'm not done yet. There's still more work to do." Despite his progress, Jaden remained vigilant. He knew that Camille and Nicholas were still lurking in the shadows, waiting for an opportunity to strike. But he refused to let fear dictate his actions. He had rebuilt his life brick by brick, and he wasn't about to let anyone tear it down again. Late one night, as Jaden sat in his office reviewing a proposal for a new project, Evelyn walked in with a glass of whiskey in hand. She set it on his desk and gave him a teasing smile. "You've been working too hard. Take a break." Jaden chuckled, leaning back in his chair. "Just trying to stay ahead. You've already won more battles than most people face in a lifetime," she said, sitting across from him. "But you don't have to do it alone. Remember that." He nodded, grateful for her unwavering support. "I couldn't have done any of this without you, Evelyn." She smiled warmly. "That's what family is for." As the night stretched on, Jaden found himself reflecting on how far he had come. He had confronted his past, reclaimed his future, and built a new life for himself and Mia. The road had been treacherous, filled with betrayal and heartbreak, but he had emerged stronger than ever. Jaden swirled the whiskey in his glass, a determined glint in his eyes. There was still more to achieve, more battles to fight, but for the first time in years, he felt ready. The man who had been broken was gone, replaced by someone who knew his worth and his strength. The journey wasn't over, but Jaden Romano was just getting started. Jaden Romano stood in the boardroom of Romano Enterprises, his reflection mirrored in the glass windows overlooking the city skyline. It had been months since he had taken control of the company, months filled with relentless work, countless challenges, and moments of self-doubt. Yet here he stood, stronger than ever, the once broken man, now a confident leader. But he knew this moment of triumph wasn't final. Not yet. Nicholas and Camille were still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for their chance to strike. The tension in the room was palpable as the board members filed in, each carrying expressions that ranged from hopeful to wary. Jaden adjusted his tie, his mind laser, focused on the critical presentation ahead. Today's meeting would decide the future of Romano Enterprises, a merger proposal with one of the country's most influential tech firms. It was a bold move, one that could solidify the company's dominance for decades. But as Jaden prepared to speak, the doors to the boardroom burst open. Nicholas strolled in, his expression a mix of smug confidence and simmering rage. Dressed impeccably, as always, he exuded a threatening presence, as though he belonged there, despite having been ousted months ago. Behind him, Camille entered, her heels clicking sharply against the polished floor. She looked poised, her icy demeanor masking the chaos she had brought into Jaden's life. "What are you doing here?" Evelyn demanded, rising from her seat, her voice cut through the room like a blade, drawing every pair of eyes to the intruders. Nicholas smirked. "Oh, little sister, did you think I'd just roll over and disappear? This company is still as much mine as it is yours, and I've come to ensure my interests are protected." "You have no interests here anymore," Jaden said calmly, though his voice carried an edge. "You were removed for embezzlement and fraud. You don't belong in this room." Nicholas's smile widened. "Ah, but you see, dear brother, I've come prepared." He pulled out a stack of papers from his briefcase and tossed them onto the table. "These documents prove that I still own shares in Romano Enterprises, enough to have a say in this merger you're so desperate to push through." Jaden's eyes narrowed as he picked up the papers, scanning them quickly. Nicholas wasn't lying. His shares, though reduced, still gave him enough leverage to disrupt the vote. He looked up at his brother, his jaw tightening. "You don't care about the merger. This is just another ploy to undermine me." Nicholas leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. "Call it whatever you want, Jaden, but I'm not going anywhere." Camille stepped forward, her gaze locking onto Jaden with a predatory gleam. "And neither am I. You may have won temporary custody of Maya, but don't think for a second that I've given up. I'll get her back, and when I do, she'll see what a failure her father truly is." Evelyn's fists clenched, but Jaden held up a hand to stop her. He met Camille's cold eyes with unwavering determination. "You've already lost Camille. Mia is safe with me, and no court will ever give her back to someone as reckless and selfish as you." Camille's lips curled into a smirk. "We'll see about that." Before she could say more, Sophia entered the room, her expression calm but authoritative. "What's going on here?" she demanded, her sharp gaze shifting between Nicholas and Camille. "An unwelcome reunion," Jaden replied, his tone icy. "Nicholas is trying to use his remaining shares to derail the merger." Sophia raised an eyebrow and turned to Nicholas. "And you think the board will side with you after everything you've done?" "You're delusional." Nicholas laughed, the sound hollow and biting. "Perhaps, but I'm betting on fear and self-interest. The board members know I can cause enough trouble to make their lives miserable." Jaden stepped forward, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "Enough of this. Nicholas, Camille, you can throw whatever obstacles you want in my way, but you won't win. Not this time." Nicholas stood, his smirk fading. "We'll see about that, little brother. But don't think for a second that this is over." With that, Nicholas and Camille turned and left the room, their exit as dramatic as their arrival. The boardroom fell silent, the tension lingering like a storm cloud. Jaden turned to the board members, his expression firm. "Let's focus on what matters," he said. "The merger is a chance to secure the future of this company. We can't let distractions get in the way of progress." One by one, the board members nodded, their confidence in Jaden unwavering. The meeting resumed, and after a thorough discussion, the merger was approved. It was a hard-fought victory, but one that Jaden knew was only the beginning. Later that evening, Jaden returned to the Romano mansion, exhausted but resolute. As he entered the living room, he found Maya playing with Evelyn, her laughter filling the air like music. The sight brought a smile to his face, reminding him of why he fought so hard every day. "Daddy!" Maya exclaimed, running to him with open arms. Jaden scooped her up, holding her tightly as she giggled against his shoulder. "How was your day, princess?" he asked, his voice soft. "Fun! Aunt Evelyn taught me how to make cookies," Maya beamed, her joy infectious. Jaden kissed her forehead. "That sounds amazing. I'll have to try one later." Evelyn approached, a warm smile on her face. "You did it, didn't you?" Jaden nodded. "The merger is approved. Nicholas tried to interfere, but we shut him down." Evelyn's smile widened. "I knew you would." As the evening wore on, Jaden found himself reflecting on the day's events. Nicholas and Camille would undoubtedly try to strike again, but he wasn't the same man they had once manipulated and betrayed. He was stronger now, wiser, and more determined than ever to protect what mattered most. Sitting by the fireplace with Maya asleep in his arms, Jaden felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. The battles he had fought, both within himself and against those who sought to destroy him, had forged him into someone unshakable. He wasn't just a survivor. He was a conqueror. As the fire crackled softly, Evelyn joined him, settling into the chair beside him. "You've come a long way, Jaden," she said, her voice filled with pride. He nodded, his gaze fixed on the flames. "And I'm not done yet." Evelyn smiled. "Dad would be proud of you." Jaden looked at her, his expression resolute. "I'm proud of myself. For the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." The road ahead would still have its challenges, but Jaden knew he could face them. He had rebuilt his life, reclaimed his legacy, and found the strength to protect the people he loved. The betrayals of the past had shaped him, but they no longer defined him. As the night deepened, Jaden whispered a silent promise to himself. No matter what came next, he would triumph. Not just for himself, but for Maya, for Evelyn, and for the Romano legacy. The future was his to shape, and he was ready. Thank you so much for staying with me and listening to this story until the end. It's been an incredible journey of redemption, strength, and perseverance, and I hope it has inspired you just as much as it has inspired me. The main lesson here is that no matter how dark the past may seem, it's never too late to reclaim your future. Life can throw obstacles our way, betrayals, failures, and heartbreak. But it's how we rise from them that defines us. Jaden's journey is a reminder that with unwavering determination and the right support, we can rebuild our lives, no matter how broken they seem. Now, I'd love to know, where are you watching from? Share with me in the comments. I always enjoy hearing from you. And if you haven't yet, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of our future stories. We've got plenty more to share, and I promise you won't want to miss them. Thank you once again for being part of this journey. Until next time, keep pushing forward and never give up on yourself.